Hello, and welcome to this interview with the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, who joins me in Munich to talk about the latest developments, Palestine, UNRWA, and the future of the current ceasefire. Thank you so much for making time to speak to the National, Mr. Lazzarini.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Good evening. So, of course, we meet at a time when the ceasefire still holds, but there are concerns it may not. Will the ceasefire be able to hold, and do you think we'll be able to get to the next phase?
We definitely all hope that the ceasefire will hold. It is true, it is a very fragile ceasefire. Even a few days ago, we didn't know if it will hold until today, and we were very much relieved when we saw that the 3 hostages have been released today, and also hundreds of Palestinian detainees, which means that we are going now to the next phase of release of hostages and detainees, and I hope that this time will also be dedicated to prepare the second phase of the ceasefire.
Now, one of the critical elements that everybody was waiting for with the ceasefire is the ability to allow aid into Gaza. So thousands of trucks have gone in, over 1,750 of them are from UNRWA that have gone in so far. How substantive is that aid? How much more needs to go in? Can you explain to us the process of the aid getting delivered?
I mean, since the beginning of the ceasefire on the 19th of January, the number of trucks entering into Gaza has increased at least by tenfold. And in average, there are 500-600 trucks. I think today there were even 800 trucks. That shows one thing, that if there is a political will, we can bring aid at scale in the Gaza Strip. Now, one of the impact has been that the food brought into Gaza has allowed to prevent a deepening of hunger and has prevented a situation of famine that the humanitarian community was extremely worried about. Is this enough? No, it's not enough. The needs are absolutely immense in Gaza. During the ceasefire, people have also been allowed to move around, to go back to their place of origin, and many of them realize that the house they have built, all the saving of decades have just gone, and these people feel just devastated. So more needs to be brought. Of course, in the future, what is required is a rehabilitation and a reconstruction plan for the Palestinians in Gaza.
Now, the future is very uncertain. We've had U.S. President Donald Trump speak about owning Gaza, that the Americans will rebuild it. There's a lot of confusion. What is your take on the situation of what the future of Gaza will look like, especially when it comes to reconstruction and people being able to rebuild their lives?
The future is extremely uncertain for the time being. First, we don't know if the ceasefire will hold, and this is the reason why all the attention has to be put on the consolidation of the ceasefire and to allow it to go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. Then the future also seems to be uncertain depending on the plan for Gaza. We have indeed heard about a possible reconstruction plan, but without the Palestinian, with the Palestinian being forcibly pushed out from their homeland. But we also hear about a plan coming from the region with the Palestinian to rehabilitate and reconstruct Gaza. I personally hope that the ongoing political process, like the one currently being led by Saudi Arabia with the support of the European Commission and the Arab League, to genuinely invest in a political process addressing the question of Palestine, that this takes off, because if it takes off, that would also allow an agency like ours to be a real asset, focusing on delivering education and primary health, while at the same time building the capacity of a future empowered Palestinian institution.
But are you able to do that, given the Knesset's law, you personally have been targeted in terms of the Israeli government saying that they do not want you to enter Gaza. You've not been able to get to the West Bank. How is UNRWA able to operate and deliver on these very important missions?
First, what is a choice? And here we have to decide. If UNRWA collapses, what is the alternative? This would create a vacuum. And if we create a vacuum, what does it mean? That means that hundreds of thousands of girls and boys in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, will be deprived of education. And their only school would be to live in the rubble, being deeply traumatized. This is nothing else than a recipe for sowing seeds for more despair and for more extremism. Now, the alternative, and here we have to choose, is we should shift into a transitional mode. We should be genuinely invested in a political process, and here UNRWA can become a real asset in being part of such a process, in building the capacity of Palestinian institutions. So at the end of the process, we have an alternative, we have a recipient which can take over these activities. Now, it is true that with the Knesset bill, our operating environment is becoming more and more difficult, but the Knesset bills do not prevent the agency to provide critical services in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. Today, our schools are still operating in the West Bank, our health centers are still operating, and the same in Gaza. Since the beginning of the ceasefire, we have reached more than 1.5 million people when it comes to food assistance, but we have also about 18,000 people a day coming to our health center. And recently also, just to show how important education is for the Palestinian, the only asset which has never ever been taken away from them, we have registered more than 280,000 girls and boys since the beginning of January of children willing to resume education even in a remote way.
Your point about a remote way is important because, of course, UNRWA schools, in part we used in shelters, and some were also bombed. So how many of them can actually go back to operating?
Yeah, you have different stages. The top priority is to bring back the children in a learning environment. Today, we are providing psychosocial support to the children, and we have a number of spaces where the basic of the education is again provided to the children. But this needs to be complemented by remote education. But meanwhile, our priority, once rehabilitation or reconstruction will start in Gaza, will be to rehabilitate the school. But this will be a stage approach. But what the children cannot wait is to go back into a learning environment.
For the rehabilitation, reconstruction, I mean, as you said, there is this Arab plan with support from different international partners. Is that how you envision the reconstruction of Gaza happening, through Arab support?
I think we will see that there is a political process, but there is also a reconstruction plan, which will be, I guess, revealed in the coming weeks. This certainly will end up after that with a reconstruction conference. But again, all this right now is speculative, but a lot of reflection is being put in this direction.
Are you able to operate in any way in East Jerusalem?
We have no international staff anymore in Jerusalem because the legislation, the Knesset legislation, are twofold. One is to prevent any presence and activities in the sovereign territory of the State of Israel. And as you know, Israel considers occupied East Jerusalem as being part of the sovereign territory of the country. That impacts primarily our operation in East Jerusalem. We have no presence today anymore at the headquarters, which is located in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. But for the time being, our schools are still providing education to the children. Our health center are still operating.
Are you in touch with the Israeli authorities?
As you know, the Knesset bill prevents any contact between UNRWA and the Israeli authority, so there is no contact anymore. It's a no-contact policy, it's a no-contact bill.
Are you in touch with the U.S. administration?
I have reached out to the new incoming U.S. administration, but so far I haven't had any contact yet.
But you would like to?
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to ask you about funding, because of course funding was a problem for UNRWA previously, but is even more so now. What is the status of the funding?
The funding is still hand to mouth. I have absolutely no visibility. Today the funding remains an existential threat, and this is further compounded by the massive political attack the agency is under, political attack aimed at dismantling the agency, and through the dismantlement of the agency, aimed at stripping the Palestinians from the refugee status.
So the funding issue is political. It's not just a matter of resources not being available. So what can be done? What are your plans now to try to tackle the funding issue, which has very real consequences for Palestinians, not only in Palestinian territories, but of course in Jordan and Lebanon?
You're right. Ultimately, the funding issue is a political issue, because if there is a will, the funding can be made available. The plan today is really to bring the mandate of the agency within a political framework, to a political framework which would clearly delineate what UNRWA can deliver, that the agency be considered as an asset and as being part of the solution of a future political solution. And here I believe that the agency has a lot to provide when it comes to delivering education, delivering primary health, delivering also social safety net, while at the same time contributing to build the capacity of future Palestinian institutions.
And the long-term future, once there is a Palestinian state, do you see a time when UNRWA will not be needed?
Absolutely, and that should be the aim. We should now shift gear into a transition mode, and it is time now that the temporary nature of the agency was supposed to be retrieve really its temporary nature. We have been temporary for 75 years, a lasting temporary. That should be over. And that is the reason why it is so important that the UNRWA be part of any political process.
Here in Munich, Sigrid Kaag warned that we might get to a point that there won't be a Palestine, rather than not having an UNRWA because there is a Palestinian state. We're in a position where there won't be a Palestine, particularly because of the developments in the West Bank. And with all the focus on Gaza, often the West Bank is forgotten. Do you worry we come to a point that there won't be a Palestine?
There is a risk. There is a risk that there wouldn't be a Palestine. There is a risk of annexation of the West Bank. There is a risk that the West Bank become what we keep hearing, Judée Samaria, part of a greater Israel. That would indeed be the end of the aspiration of the Palestinian for self-determination. It would be the end of a two-state solution, and this is the reason why we have to redouble our commitment today to be genuinely committed to a political process.
So how do we stop that from becoming a reality? That Palestine is no more?
I think we have to be serious with the alternative to be brought on the table. We have to make sure that addressing the Palestinian question is also part of the broader ambition to promote stability and normalization in the region. In fact, it's difficult to envisage a lasting normalization and stability without having, at a given point, addressed the Palestinian question.
And the concern also is for Jordan and Lebanon, because, of course, there's talk about forced displacement into Jordan, into Egypt, but of course Lebanon can be destabilized as they have a significant Palestinian population. So are you in touch with these actors, and do you think that Jordan and Egypt have made it clear enough that they cannot accept the forced displacement of Palestinians?
I think to start with, the international community should not accept a situation of forced displacement which would amount to ethnic cleansing. The Palestinians have the right to live in their home lives. There is no reason that they are pushed outside. So I believe the neighboring country have made the case, but I also do believe that the international community has to stand up to make sure that international law be not so blatantly disregarded again, as we have seen over the last 15 months. Now, clearly such a situation will also cause a shockwave in the neighboring countries that you just mentioned, which all have their domestic challenges and their own fragilities. And I'm not sure that this is a recipe to promote better stability in the region.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Lazzarini.
Thank you.